Chapter 13. Wanted by the Police. Nancy lost no time in getting to her father's office. As soon as she arrived, he closed the door to his private study and they sat down. "What did you find out?" Nancy asked eagerly. "That Renee has disappeared." "Where to?" "No one seems to know, but the police are very eager to find out." "You mean Renee is wanted by the police?" Nancy asked. "Yes." Mr. Drew explained that up to 6 months before, the Renees had lived in a villa outside Paris. Then suddenly, Thomas had sold his business and they had vanished. "But," said the lawyer, "it seems that Mr. Rene had some strange dealings with various people and is liable to imprisonment." "No wonder he disappeared," said Nancy. "And it may take a long time to find him in a country the size of France." "Yes," her father agreed. "And if he left that country, it may take even longer." "Because he would have had to use a passport under an assumed name?" Nancy asked. "Exactly. But I did determine one thing from the immigration authorities," said Mr. Drew. "If Thomas Rene came to the United States, it was not under the names of Rene, Judson, or Bull. No one from France has arrived here under those names during the past year and a half." Nancy sighed. "All the facts we turn up seem to be on the negative side." After a few moments' thought, she said, "Let's try a new angle, Dad." "What is it?" "Those pictures that Henri painted may be an important clue in this whole thing," Nancy pointed out. "If Rene isn't an honest man, then his story about the race among art dealers was probably false. And in the light of what's been happening to the Fontaines, there's a chance that some of the pictures were sent to the United States to be sold. One may even be in River Heights." Mr. Drew looked at his daughter. "You're inferring there's some connection between the paintings and the enemies of the Centrovian underground?" "In a way. At least somebody doesn't want the Fontaines around here. Dad, the Customs Service ought to be able to help us on this. Could you find out?" "I think so," Mr. Drew replied. "But first, how about having lunch with me?" "Wonderful, Dad. I'll call Hannah that I shan't be home." While Mr. Drew checked his private phone listings and put through a call, Nancy spoke to the housekeeper on a phone in the outer office. "Oh, Nancy," Hannah said, "I'm glad you called. Mrs. Parsons was here. She's terribly upset because Millie Koff didn't come back after all. In fact, the Koffs haven't returned to the Claymore Hotel." Nancy's heart skipped a beat, and her old suspicion about Mr. Koff was aroused. But a moment later, she told herself that perhaps the Koffs had not yet left Cliffwood and called the hotel there at once. "Mr. Koff and his daughter checked out yesterday," the clerk told her. "They left no forwarding address." "Thank you," Nancy said absently, her mind in a whirl. Had she let Mr. Koff put one over on her? Was he in league with the Judsons and maybe Raymond Bull and even Rene? "My goodness, Nancy," said her father, as she returned to his office. "You look as if somebody had just double-crossed you." "Maybe someone has." She told him the story. The lawyer looked grave, then finally smiled. "Let's eat. Maybe we'll be brighter after lunch and can figure this out." He took his daughter to the lawyers' club, and Nancy found herself the center of attention. Her father's friends enjoyed exchanging sallies with the young detective and trying to stump her on knotty problems. As a result, Nancy completely forgot her own case until she and her father returned to Mr. Drew's office. As he and Nancy sat down to talk, a call came in from the Customs Service. The lawyer listened intently and jotted down some notes. Finally, he replaced the phone and turned to his daughter. "Here's a full report," he said. "All 12 of Henri's paintings were shipped to the United States on various dates during the past 12 months. The consignor for 11 of them was Thomas René, but the 12th, the one with the scarlet slippers, was sent over by a man signing the name Raoul Amiens. Nancy, excited at this information, asked, "Who received them in the United States?" Pierre Duparc. He was an art dealer in New York, but since then he has sold out and left without a trace of his whereabouts, I was told. Another lost suspect, Nancy remarked. But not discouraged, she said. Dad, I suppose we should check up on Raoul Amiens. If he's in this country, then he may be right in our vicinity, using the name Judson. Why not send a cable to Paris to inquire about him? Carson Drew agreed and dispatched the cable. Nancy went to the dancing school where Bess and Mrs. Nickerson were carrying on diligently. Nancy's ankle felt so much better that she was able to teach her class of little girls. Late in the afternoon, she returned to Mr. Drew's office. He was about to leave for home. "Well, another hunch of yours paid off," he said. "Raoul Amiens received a passport and visa and came to the United States. He married after arriving." "Oh, Dad, that's wonderful news!" Nancy exclaimed. "I'll bet he's here in connection with Henri's paintings." "But Amiens owned only one of them, remember?" her father pointed out. "Maybe Amiens and René were working some scheme together," Nancy speculated. "Or it's possible they're enemies and the Fontaines are in the middle." "It's baffling, I agree," the lawyer said. He put an arm around Nancy. "But I haven't a doubt that you'll find the solution. I could almost swear a new idea is formulating in that head of yours this very minute." Nancy laughed. "I own up. I think I'll run an ad in the Gazette for a painting of a ballet dancer and see if I can locate any of Henri's work." She wrote out the advertisement and on the way home left it at the newspaper office. She was told it would be in the morning edition. Soon after breakfast the next day, Bess and George arrived. They read the notice, then Nancy told them that she had worked out a plan for picking up the replies. "I'll need your help," she said. "What kind of help?" Bess asked. "I have 2 dance classes late this afternoon." "You'll make it. We'll go to the Gazette office about 3, after people have had a chance to answer the ad. I have a hunch that one of the suspects may mail or send a note and come to see who put the ad in the paper. I'd like you 2 girls to keep an eye on anyone who may be standing around when I go in to pick up the mail. See whether anyone seems particularly interested." Just before 3 o'clock, Nancy drove downtown in her convertible, parked near the entrance of the newspaper office, and strolled in. She spotted her 2 friends at vantage points near large pillars inside the building. Nancy handed in the receipt for the box number and received 3 letters. She was about to open one of them when suddenly Bess signaled frantically and pointed out the window. Johann Kauf was watching Nancy intently. Nancy stuffed the 3 letters into her handbag and went outside. Mr. Kauf had not moved. Before she could speak, he smiled pleasantly. "How are you?" he asked. "I just happened to see you crossing the street and waited to speak to you." Nancy was taken aback, especially after the man explained that he and Millie had just returned to the Claymore after stopping overnight on the way back from Cliffwood. "I've been rather disappointed at not hearing from you or your father about my case," the Centrovian said. "I hope I did nothing to offend you." "Oh, no," Nancy found herself saying. She still could not feel sure about the man. "Have you received any more threatening messages from Mr. Judson?" she asked. "No. Perhaps that letter I sent about retaining your father on the case reached Mr. Judson and discouraged him from suing me." Nancy, still unable to shake off her suspicions completely, asked, "Are René and Amiens friends of yours?" Kauf looked at her with a puzzled expression. "I never heard of them." Nancy believed that he was telling the truth. Suddenly, Mr. Koff laughed and said, "Miss Detective, were you trying to trap me? Are these men enemies of the Centrovian underground?" As Nancy merely smiled and did not reply, he added seriously, "I have heard nothing concerning my own briefcase, and I am still worried about the loss of those highly informative letters." "I wish I could help you locate them," Nancy said, "and I'll tell Dad I saw you." The man bowed as she said goodbye and walked away. Nancy signaled for the girls to join her in the car. They reported no other suspicious characters and listened to Nancy's story about Mr. Koff with mixed emotions. "He frightens me," Bess declared. George said tersely, "I'd certainly like to get things settled about that man. Is he a kind, loving father or a villain?" Nancy chuckled and said they ought to find out soon. Then she asked Bess to take the wheel so she could read the answers to the want ad. She took the 3 letters from her handbag. As the girls drove off, with Nancy seated between the cousins, she laid 2 of the replies on her lap. The 3rd she opened with a bobby pin. As Nancy spread out the sheet, she gasped in astonishment. George looked over her friend's shoulder, and her eyes widened. "What is it?" Bess demanded, stopping for a traffic light. Nancy held up the paper for her to read. On it had been sketched the familiar scarlet slipper insignia. In printed letters, similar to the note received by the Fontaines, were the words, "Stop your detective work at once, or you will find yourself in grave peril." End of chapter 13.